Hi, so in this video we're going to take a closer look at compliance and security in the context of ShareDo. And in particular we're going to look at authenticating users, how users are authorized to perform specific functions inside of ShareDo using our role-based permission model, together with how we pass that authentication down across the application layer alongside things like GDPR, personal identifiable information. So at the application layer, ShareDo security is based on standard protocols such as OAuth, OpenID, together with HTTPS. So we're going to be looking at this from two aspects really. One is from the modeler configurator perspective, how you configure this stuff, but also from an end user, so how we enforce the permissions in terms of a role-based permissions model, but also what kind of auditability we see from a front end. So if we jump into ShareDo, we jump into our administration portal. Again, there's a number of specific portals based on the type of configuration work we're doing. We model all of our work types in Modeler, and then there is an administration portal where we're doing things like configuring all our integrated services. We're configuring our security model, our patterns of security permissions. So if we jump across into here, what we see is that we've got integrations. One of the integrations that we've got is something called Identity Server. So this is where we can configure and register all of the different identity providers that you want to integrate with. So we integrate with lots of different identity providers to give you access to that security token. So things like local forms-based authentication through to Active Azure Directory, where you can skim in your users using skim technology. And you can see here that we can add different providers. So anything around like social logins, for instance, like Facebook and Google provider, through to LinkedIn and Twitter and things. And then we can register things like OpenID providers like Azure AD. You can see here we've got some pre-configured ones. So in this environment, we've configured Active Directory. That's going to give me my access token, and I'm then going to use OAuth to delegate that authority down through the application layer. And that security also passes through to our data security and data warehouse. So if I've got a permission inside of the application where I'm working on a matter type, for instance, or a particular set of matter types, because I've got a claim on those, then I can only go into the reporting engine and start to produce reports based on my security claim. So everything is security trimmed from search and everything else. So you can see in here we can add different providers, we can configure providers, we can also add specific applications for things like implicit flow and impersonation. So lots of, again, no-code configuration around authentication. If we take the next level down in terms of linked services, we can use that authentication, that delegated authority in terms of our delegation through OAuth, through our integrated services. So things like if I'm integrating with O365 for calendar events, or I'm integrating with email or ShareDo, or things like iManage for document storage, we can configure that authentication via OAuth to provide or delegate that security down through that application layer. Now down into our role-based security, what you can see inside of ShareDo, there's a couple of different what we call permissions. So we've got global permissions and we've got ShareDo permissions. Now ShareDo permissions are assigned through your role, so they're things like, there's a core set of them, I think there's 10 of them, things like can I read, can I update, can I transition milestones, can I add participants, can I view this thing? And you'll get those claims based on your role participation on a particular work type. So I am the case owner, I am the reader, for instance. And then we've got a whole suite of granular permissions in your security model around the things that you can do when you can get there. And obviously this is dynamic as well. So as you go and configure new work types and new work items, ShareDo dynamically creates the permissions associated with those elements. So can you create this new work item that you've created? Can I go and edit it? Can I update it? So you can see on here we've got hundreds of permissions. And what you can do is you can configure those permissions into what we call permission sets. And those permission sets can be applied to groups or special teams that we call access control teams within your structure. So anyone who's a member of that team will inherit the permission set that you applied to that team. So we keep the maintenance of your security model really clean. So you can see on here there's a whole bunch of permissions, and then if we take a quick look into our team structures, you'll see there's different types of teams. Teams like pods that interact with tasks and share work, and then specific teams that have what we call permission sets associated to them. So we take a quick look at that, and we'll look at our permission sets. And what we can see is that we've got permission sets that are groups of permissions. So you'll create patterns of permissions and then apply those to ACL. So a really quick way of managing that. And that works in the combination of my role-based permission model. So I am the case owner, therefore I can update this case. And then once I'm there, I can do all of these things like capture a comment, create this, create a new task, generate a document. So role-based permissions around that. We can also see that in terms of being enforced. And you can see that from the context of your case. So if we jump through to that, everything is auditable. So we'll see that in two ways. The rich view that we've already seen when we looked at our work type config around chronology. So when we're creating chronology items, I can come in here and I can see all of the things that all of the events that are happening. But what we've also got is a fine-grained audit, which is telling me all of the passive and active activities. So things like who's browsing, which pages are they browsing, and what they're updating, and what they've changed it from and to. Now they're doing this in the context of their security model, so have I got permission to do this? And even this works dynamically, so if I've not got permission, for instance, to do something, I won't even see it on the menu. So we kind of do that through progressive disclosure, so you'll see that at front-end user perspective. One of the other things we can do in terms of security, as well as things like compliance around data security, we have specific tools inside of ShareDo that manage retention policies. We don't store the documents. Documents are stored in your document repository, but we can do things like invoke retention policies using ShareDo workflows. We can also, there's a tool called a data anonymizer that can anonymize specific data based on retention schemes and when we're passing data from one environment to the other. So for instance, you might want to do some user acceptance testing in a particular environment where you're simulating a production environment, but you want to anonymize the data, and there's tools available inside of ShareDo to manage that. We can manage subject access requests using a specific ShareDo work type, and we can also there's fine-grained permissions around what we call personal information. So that's identifiable, the specific security around that, and you'll only get to see and update where you've got those specific permissions. The final part of the security model is where we can set up what we call ODS walls. So that's where we're managing entities in a particular behavior set. So I might have one particular client mandate where they have specific data controls around entities, so things like experts and suppliers, and we can't get that cross-pollination of people, places, organizations. So we can set up things called ODS walls, and that's a feature inside of ShareDo. That's a real quick insight into ShareDo's compliance and security model. We may be touching on some of these elements in more detail. And the next video that we're going to look at in this series is where we look at solution packages and accelerators. So how we turbocharge the implementation process.